Why do we ignore what we can't measure? What if your child's fate depended on something science can't yet explain? Would you trust instinct over protocol if it meant saving someone you love? Late at night, under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights at Mercy Children's Hospital in Austin, Texas, the world had shrunk to the four walls of the pediatric ICU. Machines blinked and beeped in the shadows, measuring every breath, every flutter of a heart, every rise and fall of oxygen in the blood. But in room 316, where 9-year-old Ava Brooks lay in a deep, unreachable sleep, the numbers offered little comfort. Her parents, Ben and Melissa Brooks, watched those numbers anyway, exhausted but afraid to look away, clinging to the hope that somewhere, hidden in all that data, was a sign that Ava would wake up. Ava had been a bright, fearless whirlwind. Soccer games, science fairs, climbing trees in their backyard. That was before the accident, before the car that never stopped at the intersection. Now she was hooked to tubes and wires, her small body stilled by the trauma that had thrown her into a coma. For 3 days, her parents had sat beside her bed, living minute to minute, their hope shrinking each time the neurologist shook his head. Tonight, though, there was someone else in the room. Curled at the foot of Ava's bed was Ranger, a large, grizzled German shepherd with eyes like amber glass. To most, he looked like any hospital therapy dog, but the old scars around his muzzle told another story. Ranger had once been a search and rescue K-9, a legend among first responders in Central Texas, now retired to the quieter life of comforting sick children. Melissa, herself a former volunteer with Ranger's old team, trusted him in ways she couldn't always explain. It started with a low growl, barely audible over the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricked. For a moment, Melissa thought he was dreaming. Then he stood, tense. Hackles raised, his gaze fixed on Ava, and he let out a sharp, urgent bark. Once, twice, 3 times, before pacing back and forth, claws clicking on the tile. He circled the bed, stopped, and began pawing frantically at the rail. Ben jumped up, startled. "What's wrong with him?" Melissa's heart pounded as she moved to calm the dog, but Ranger jerked away, his whole body quivering with agitation. He nipped at the metal rail, teeth scraping, then barked again, louder this time, the sound echoing down the hall. In the ICU, where quiet was sacred, Ranger's outburst was chaos. Within moments, the night nurse, Sarah James, rushed in, followed by an orderly. "Is he sick?" Sarah whispered, glancing nervously at the machines. Or did he sense something? Ben shook his head, confusion and irritation warring on his face. He's never done this before. Never. Not with Ava. The orderly reached for Ranger's collar, but Melissa stepped between them. "Wait, let's just see. Maybe he's trying to tell us something." Sarah hesitated, then looked at the monitors. Nothing had changed. No alarms, no red numbers. Ava's heart was steady, her brain waves a flat ocean on the EEG. Just as Sarah turned away, Ranger gave a deep, mournful howl and pressed his nose to Ava's hand. For a long minute, everyone froze. The hallway was quiet again, but the echo of Ranger's anxiety lingered in the room like a question no one wanted to answer. Dr. Lucas Howell, the night neurologist, swept in with his usual sense of urgency. Silver-haired and sharp-eyed, he was known for his unwavering faith in data. "What's the disturbance?" he demanded, already eyeing Ranger with disapproval. Sarah started to explain, but Dr. Howell cut her off. "If the dog is disrupting the patient's rest, he has to go. ICU is no place for animals acting out." Melissa bristled. "With respect, doctor, Ranger's not just any animal. He's trained. He saved lives in the field. He doesn't do this for no reason." Dr. Howell's gaze softened just a fraction. With respect, Mrs. Brooks, I trust the machines. If something changes, we'll know. I need you to remove the dog or I'll have to call security. Ben's shoulders sagged. For a moment, Melissa almost gave in. But she looked down at Ranger, still staring at Ava as if he could see something invisible. Give us a few minutes, she said quietly. After Howell left, Sarah lingered. She crouched beside Ranger, stroking his fur. I've seen animals sense things people can't. I'll check the vitals again. You can stay, for now. The minutes ticked by, slow and tense. Melissa remembered the stories from her time volunteering during the Great Texas Flood. How Ranger once found a missing child no one else could. She wondered, not for the first time, if some instincts couldn't be measured at all. Ben slumped into his chair, head in his hands. What are we doing, Mel? The doctors, they're losing hope, should we? She took his hand, squeezed it. We can't. Not yet. A soft whimper from Ranger drew their attention. He lay down, head on his paws, but his eyes never left Ava. The machines hummed. Outside, Austin's city lights glimmered, oblivious. The ICU's peace had been shattered, but in the quiet after Ranger's outburst, a new, uneasy hope lingered. Maybe what mattered most tonight wasn't in the numbers on a screen, but in the frantic heartbeat of an old dog who refused to give up. And as dawn crept toward the horizon, Melissa made herself a promise. She would listen, not just to the machines, not just to the experts, but to every sign, every instinct, every living thing that still believed Ava could come back, because sometimes what we can't measure is the only thing that matters at all. The hospital halls were always busiest in the early morning, but in the ICU time moved differently. A constant cycle of hushed voices, hurried footsteps, and the steady drone of machines. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, slicing the room into gold and shadow. Ava still slept, lost somewhere deep inside herself, her little chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Her parents, Ben and Melissa, sat stiffly at her bedside. Ranger sprawled protectively near her feet. The memory of last night's chaos was still sharp. Ranger's wild barking, Dr. Howell's stern order, the feeling that something invisible had shifted. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. At 7:13 a.m., Eli Turner arrived, looking more rumpled than usual. As Ranger's handler, Eli was used to being called in for dog emergencies, occasional accidents, a bit of spilled water, a child's fearful scream, but never anything like this. He'd gotten the message from night staff. Therapy dog agitated, disrupting care, possible removal from ICU. Now, as he entered room 316, Eli felt the heavy weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. Ranger immediately perked up, trotting over to Eli, tail wagging, but the movement was restless, not joyful. Melissa met Eli's eyes, her own brimming with fatigue and hope. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, careful not to wake Ben, who'd finally drifted into a shallow sleep. Eli squatted down, scratching Ranger behind the ears. "You gave everyone quite a scare, big guy." He glanced at the family. "What happened?" Melissa recounted the night. Ranger's pacing, his frantic barking, the way he'd bitten at Ava's bed rail, how even Sarah, the nurse, seemed unsure whether to intervene or trust the dog's strange behavior. As she spoke, Eli's face darkened with concern. He's never acted like this with any patient. Not once. Just then, Dr. Howell strode into the room, crisp and commanding. "Mr. Turner, I'm glad you're here. Ranger needs to be removed from the ICU. Hospital policy is clear about disruptions, especially in critical care." Eli stood up, bracing himself. "Doctor, I understand policy, but Ranger's trained for situations like this. He doesn't just act out for no reason. Maybe he picked up on something we missed. Howell's jaw tightened. The dog's presence is a privilege, not a right. I have to think about every child in this unit, not just your daughter, he said to Melissa, then to Eli. If Ranger can't remain calm, he leaves. That's not negotiable. Ben woke up at the sound of Howell's voice, blinking as the argument echoed in his ears. He straightened, catching the tail end of the conversation. Please, he pleaded, voice cracking. We can't take any more chances. If Ranger can help Ava, we have to try. He's not hurting anyone. The room was tense. Everyone standing off against each other, uncertainty thick in the air. Sarah James, finishing her overnight shift, slipped quietly into the back of the room. She'd watched Ranger's behavior last night, had felt a chill crawl up her spine when his agitation seemed to surge moments before Ava's heart rate dipped, too brief for the monitors to even alarm. Sarah cleared her throat. Excuse me, Dr. Howell, but there might be something we're missing here. Howell's eyes narrowed, surprised by her interruption. Go on, Nurse James. She hesitated. Last night, I noticed Ranger getting restless about 10 seconds before Ava's O2 saturation dropped. It was so quick, the system almost missed it. Then it normalized. But it happened again. And both times, Ranger seemed to sense it coming. She glanced at Melissa and Ben. I think it's worth looking into. Howell's skepticism was written all over his face. Anecdotes aren't evidence. We need data, not stories about animal intuition. If there's something wrong with Ava, the monitors will tell us. Ben's voice rose. With all due respect, Doctor, the monitors didn't tell us anything last night. Ranger did. For a moment, the only sound was the distant beep of another child's heart monitor down the hall. Eli stepped forward, looking from Howell to Ben, then back to Ranger. What if we compromise? Let Ranger stay, but keep a close record of his behavior. If there's no connection, I'll take him out of the ICU myself. But if there is, don't we owe it to Ava to listen? Sarah nodded, already pulling her phone from her pocket. I'll start a log, timestamps, vitals, Ranger's actions. At least we'll have a record if something happens again. Howell relented, though his lips pressed into a thin, frustrated line. One more outburst and the dog is gone. For now, keep him here, but strictly monitored. No exceptions. Tension hummed in the room, even as the group reluctantly agreed. It was a compromise, not a victory. But it bought them time. Throughout the morning, Melissa kept one eye on Ava and the other on Ranger, watching the dog for any sign of another episode. Ben sat with a notepad, jotting down everything he noticed. Ranger shifting his weight, twitching an ear, staring at the window. Sarah checked the machines, comparing each reading to the timestamps on her new log. Every so often, Eli quietly spoke to Ranger, reminding him he was doing a good job. Hours passed, slow and uncertain. Then, just after noon, Ranger stiffened again. His ears flattened, body tensed. He whined, eyes fixed on Ava's face. Within seconds, Ava's breathing faltered. The ventilator clicked, and her O2 dipped just long enough for Sarah to see the numbers drop before stabilizing. Sarah's heart pounded as she called out the time, logging the event. Eli and Melissa exchanged glances, a silent, hopeful question. Was this more than coincidence? The cycle repeated twice more. Each time, Ranger seemed to sense a change moments before the machines did, sometimes even before the monitors reacted at all. Word spread quickly through the ICU. Some staff were skeptical, muttering about superstitions and the danger of false hope. Others, especially the night nurses, watched Ranger closely, their doubts mingling with a new, uneasy respect. Dr. Howell grew increasingly uncomfortable, the fortress of certainty he'd built now showing cracks. Still, he clung to protocol. "We'll keep the logs, but I won't accept a dog's hunch over medicine." That afternoon, Dr. Natalie Collins arrived, a consulting neurologist known for her open mind and unorthodox methods. Sarah briefed her on Ranger's behavior, handing her the fledgling logbook. Dr. Collins leafed through it, brow furrowed, then crouched to meet Ranger's gaze. "You might be onto something, old boy," she murmured, scratching his head. Ben, clutching Melissa's hand, found himself daring to hope again. Melissa, watching her daughter and the loyal dog at her feet, knew deep down that something extraordinary was unfolding. She thought of all the times science had saved lives, of all the times it had failed. Perhaps what they needed now was a little bit of both: data and instinct, science and faith, measured risks and the courage to listen to what couldn't be measured. As evening fell, the logs grew longer, the staff's attention sharper. Every person in Ava's room, parents, nurses, doctors, even the dog handler, watched Ranger with new eyes, wondering if maybe, just maybe, his instincts were more than a fluke. And outside, beyond the walls of the ICU, the city pulsed on, oblivious to the silent battle playing out inside Mercy Hospital. The fight between protocol and instinct, certainty and hope, and the impossible question: how do you measure the things that truly matter? The world of the ICU blurred into a haze of hours, a quiet storm of hope, fear, and unspoken prayers. As the sun set behind the Texas skyline, the mood in room 316 shifted from tense vigilance to fragile reflection. For once, there was no outburst, no crisis, just the steady rhythm of the machines and the gentle rise and fall of Ava's chest. Melissa sat by the window, her thoughts drifting to another time and place, a time before hospital walls and ventilators, when she'd first learned to trust a dog's instinct over human logic. It was the fall after Hurricane Harvey, when the floodwaters had finally receded from the outskirts of Austin. Melissa remembered the phone call: a missing child, last seen near a washed-out creek. Dozens of first responders scoured the area, but hope was fading. That night, she'd volunteered to bring sandwiches and water to the rescue teams. She'd watched from a distance as Ranger, younger then but already legendary, worked the muddy banks. Most search dogs zigzagged on leash, noses to the ground, but Ranger had stopped dead in his tracks and looked straight at the woods beyond the floodplain. His handler, Eli, still clean-shaven in those days, followed his lead. Minutes later, they heard a faint cry. Against all odds, the child was found, curled and shivering under a broken log, invisible to every human eye. Melissa never forgot the look in Ranger's eyes, a fierce, quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. Now, in the dim glow of the ICU, Melissa wondered if the same certainty burned in Ranger tonight. She glanced at him, stretched out beside Ava, his breaths deep and measured, but his gaze always alert. It wasn't just restlessness, it was vigilance. She could feel it, a thread of connection that went beyond training or science, something rooted in trust and shared experience. As the night deepened, the ICU settled into its usual routine. Nurses checking charts, doctors whispering in the hall, the cleaning staff moving silently between rooms. Ben had finally fallen into a restless sleep, his hand still clutching Ava's favorite stuffed bear. Eli sat on the floor, legs crossed, his back against the wall. Every so often, he would reach out and run his hand through Ranger's fur. They didn't speak much. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. But the silence was its own kind of comfort. Sarah James, finishing her third cup of lukewarm coffee, entered quietly, a tablet in hand. She approached Melissa, showing her the log she'd started. "I've been tracking Ranger's behavior alongside Ava's vitals," she whispered. "It's not just last night. There's a pattern. Every time Ranger gets agitated, Ava's breathing or heart rate changes, even if it's only by a fraction. Sometimes he reacts before we see anything on the monitor." Melissa's heart skipped. "Do you think he knows what's going to happen?" Sarah hesitated, searching for words. "I don't know if it's knowing or sensing. Maybe he picks up on smells, changes in her skin, something we can't see. But it's consistent." Dr. Collins had just finished reviewing another patient's scan when she stopped by the door, watching the scene. "How's our girl?" she asked softly. Sarah handed her the tablet. "I've been logging Ranger's reactions with Ava's vitals. Look at the timestamps." Dr. Collins scrolled through the entries. "You're telling me the dog predicts changes in Ava's condition?" Melissa answered, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Not predicts. He feels it. He always has." Eli finally spoke up, voice low and steady. "With Ranger, you learn to pay attention. He doesn't just react, he intervenes. It's like he wants us to know what he knows, even if he can't speak." The ICU team began paying closer attention. Whenever Ranger so much as twitched an ear or lifted his head, Sarah would mark the time and check Ava's monitors. Sometimes, nothing changed. Other times, within a minute or two, Ava's heart rate would spike or her oxygen level would dip. The more data they gathered, the more undeniable the connection became. But not everyone was convinced. Dr. Howell remained skeptical, watching from a distance, arms folded across his chest. "Correlation isn't causation," he muttered during shift change. "I don't want us chasing ghosts while the real problem goes unchecked." Dr. Collins smiled, undeterred. "Sometimes ghosts are just things we haven't explained yet, Lucas." The night passed in this new rhythm. Nurse, doctor, handler, and parents, all taking cues from a German shepherd who seemed to know more than any machine. Melissa found herself talking to Ranger as if he could understand every word. "What do you see in her, old friend?" she whispered. "What are we missing?" There were moments, fleeting but profound, when Ranger would rest his chin on Ava's blanket and close his eyes. Melissa swore she could feel Ava's hand twitch in response, though the doctors insisted it was just reflex. Still, she logged every detail. Ranger's sighs, his soft whines, the times he glanced at the door as if expecting something, or someone, to arrive. Just before dawn, a new wrinkle emerged. Ranger, normally silent except for his warning barks, started making a series of soft, guttural sounds whenever a certain ventilator alarm trilled, an alarm that sometimes signaled nothing more than a sensor slipping, but other times warned of more serious trouble. Each time the staff checked the equipment, sometimes finding a tube loose or a setting slightly off. It happened enough times that even Dr. Howell began to take notice, jotting a note in Ava's chart. Therapy dogs' responses warrant further observation. The team grew more united in their curiosity. Sarah took charge of synchronizing the log with the hospital's official records. Dr. Collins set up a camera to monitor Ranger's behavior 24/7, hoping to capture something missed by human eyes. Eli explained more of Ranger's history to anyone who would listen. How he'd been nearly retired after the flood, haunted by nightmares and sudden panic, until Melissa herself had helped him recover through gentle training and endless patience. Ben, for the first time since the accident, dared to hope. He watched his daughter and the loyal dog beside her, the room's boundaries expanding from numbers and monitors to something far less tangible. Faith in the unexplained. Trust in the seen and unseen. Every time Ranger moved, Ben's heart leapt. Every time he lay quiet, Ben found the strength to breathe. Melissa, lost in memory and hope, understood better than anyone. Some bonds couldn't be measured or charted. They were forged in moments of crisis and sustained in long, silent vigils. By a dog's devotion, a mother's love, a family's determination to listen to what the world often ignored. By sunrise, the ICU felt transformed. Science and instinct, discipline and love, data and faith, all circling around the little girl who still lay silent but, now more than ever, not alone. And as the first light spilled across Ava's face, Ranger lifted his head, eyes shining with that same fierce certainty Melissa remembered from the flood. The certainty that sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot yet prove, and this time no one was willing to ignore it. The day began with the low, electric tension of a Texas summer. By afternoon, thunderheads had muscled their way across the sky, heavy with rain and the promise of trouble. Inside Mercy Children's Hospital, the storm felt distant, muffled by layers of glass and concrete. But the ICU team felt the shift, a nervousness that settled in their bones. Ben stood at Ava's bedside, rubbing tired eyes as the room darkened under gathering clouds. Melissa sat by the window, her gaze flicking between the storm and the monitors. Ranger, normally stretched out at Ava's feet, was unusually restless. He paced the small space, nails tapping a steady rhythm against the linoleum. Eli, who'd spent much of the day quietly advocating for Ranger's continued presence, watched the dog's agitation with growing concern. The air outside grew thick, flashes of lightning turned the sky to white, and thunder shook the building in its frame. In the ICU, fluorescent lights flickered. Ava lay still, wrapped in the hush that only hospitals seem to hold, her parents' hope and fear bound up in every quiet beep. Suddenly, with a crack like the end of the world, the storm struck full force. The hospital trembled. For a brief, terrifying moment, the power died, a total unnatural silence as every machine and every light blinked out. In the pitch black, someone screamed down the hall. Ben clutched Melissa's hand. For one suspended instant, all that kept Ava alive was hope. And then, as if exhaling, the backup generators kicked in. The lights returned, harsh and sterile. Machines rebooted, alarms blaring in a chaotic chorus. Staff rushed from room to room, checking every child, every cord. It was chaos, but organized, practiced even, except for what happened next in room 316. Ranger erupted. The calm, disciplined dog transformed, springing onto Ava's bed. He barked with a violence no one had seen before, a primal, desperate sound. He pawed at the blankets, then at the ventilator tubing, teeth flashing as he tried to pull at something invisible. Ben shouted, "Eli, get him down!" But Eli froze. He'd never seen Ranger act like this. The dog wasn't attacking. He was targeting something specific. Ranger's entire focus was on the ventilator, barking, whining, then snapping at the cable as if it were alive. Melissa tried to pull him back, but he refused to move. Sarah rushed in frantic, glancing from the monitors to the dog and back again. Dr. Howell burst through the door, his face twisted in outrage. "That animal is endangering the patient! Get him out now!" Ranger lunged again, knocking the ventilator tubing askew. Alarms screamed, red lights flashed. In the confusion, Sarah leaned in, her instincts on high alert. She checked the ventilator. Her hands found the main connector, and her heart stopped. The cable was loose, halfway unplugged from the power supply, shaken loose by the storm's tremor. If it had disconnected entirely, Ava's oxygen would have plummeted, with no alarms to warn them. Ranger's outburst wasn't random. It was life-saving. Sarah shoved the cable back in, securing it with shaking hands. The machines quieted. Ava's vital signs stabilized on the screen. The chaos ebbed, replaced by a stunned silence. Melissa's voice cracked. He saved her. He saved our daughter. Dr. Howell looked from Ranger to Ava to Sarah, his face pale. For a long moment he was silent. A rare thing. Is she stable? He finally managed. Sarah nodded, still catching her breath. She's stable. If the cable had come all the way loose. No one finished the thought. They all knew how close they'd come. Dr. Natalie Collins arrived, breathless, having run from the other end of the ICU. She took in the scene. The toppled IV pole, Ranger still growling protectively at the ventilator, Sarah on the floor, Melissa and Ben clutching each other. What happened? Sarah explained in a rush, her voice trembling. The power outage. Ventilator cable nearly disconnected. Ranger alerted. Maybe saved Ava's life. Collins knelt and hugged Ranger around the neck, whispering, "Good boy, good boy." She looked up at Dr. Howell, her expression firm. I think we have to admit something extraordinary is going on here. Howell, visibly shaken, struggled to regain his composure. I still need evidence, but I can't argue with what just happened. Eli, still holding Ranger's leash, met Howell's eyes. Sometimes instinct is the evidence. The storm raged on outside, thunder rattling the windows. Inside, the ICU was changed. Something had shifted. Dr. Collins and Sarah began working together, reviewing every incident, every log entry, comparing them to Ava's monitor data. Sarah, now Ranger's staunchest advocate, set up a whiteboard to track the timing of every outburst, every shift in Ava's vital signs. Dr. Howell, his skepticism battered but not broken, agreed to keep Ranger in the ICU under close supervision. We'll watch him like a hawk. If his behavior matches up with Ava's condition, we keep him, but I want everything documented, every minute. The team, once divided, began to coalesce around this unlikely alliance. A stubborn neurologist, a dog handler, two parents desperate for hope, a compassionate nurse, and a dog who seemed to know more than any of them. Every staff member was briefed. Ranger's presence was no longer just therapy. He was now being watched as closely as any piece of equipment. That night, as the storm finally passed and the city lay drenched in quiet, Eli and Sarah sat together outside Ava's room. Sarah confided, "I've been a nurse for 12 years. I've never seen a dog save a life like that. I don't care what anyone says. I believe he's seeing something we can't." Eli nodded, stroking Ranger's fur. "He's saved lives before. Maybe this time, he's saving all of us. From ourselves." Inside, Ben and Melissa watched their daughter sleep. Ranger curled at her side. The monitors blinked their steady rhythm. And somewhere beyond the limits of protocol and procedure, a new truth began to take hold. Sometimes, it's the things we can't explain that matter most. For the first time in days, hope was louder than fear. And as the sun rose over a city scrubbed clean by rain, Mercy Hospital's ICU team found themselves united, not just by medicine, but by the undeniable bond between a girl, her family, and the dog who refused to let her go. The morning after the storm, Mercy Children's Hospital was bathed in the washed-out light of a city that had survived the night. There was a subtle but unmistakable change in the air of the ICU, a hum of anticipation, a sense that everyone was waiting for something to shift. The previous night's events had traveled quickly, growing in the telling. How a therapy dog's wild intuition had saved a child's life when the machines nearly failed. Dr. Collins arrived before sunrise, still dressed in the same scrubs from the night before. She met Sarah and Eli at the nurse's station, where the makeshift whiteboard now dominated the wall. Columns marked time, Ranger's behavior, Ava's vitals, action taken. The tally marks were growing, each one a thread in a tapestry no one could explain, but no one dared ignore. "We need to get systematic about this," Collins said, pushing up her sleeves. "If Ranger's picking up on something we can't see, we have to log everything. No guesswork, no gaps. We treat him like another monitor." Eli nodded, ruffling Ranger's ears as if the dog could understand every word. "He's ready. For Ben and Melissa, hope was a fragile thing, still rattled by the chaos of the storm. Ben watched every movement of the staff, every flicker of Ava's monitors, every twitch of Ranger's tail. Melissa, who had started to write her own observations in the margins of Sarah's log, felt the tide beginning to turn. They weren't the only ones who believed anymore. That afternoon, Dr. Howell called an impromptu meeting in the staff break room. The old skepticism was still there, but so was something new, an undercurrent of humility, a willingness to reconsider. "I don't believe in magic," Howell began, "but I do believe in evidence. We're going to document this minute by minute. If this dog is seeing something, we'll find out what." Sarah showed him the previous night's log entries. 3 times between midnight and 4 a.m., Ranger had become agitated, ears up, tail stiff, barking or pacing. Each episode was marked, and within 2 minutes of each, Ava's oxygen levels or heart rate had changed. Sometimes it was minor, sometimes more pronounced, but the pattern was undeniable. "Correlation doesn't prove causation," Howell said, almost out of habit. But even he didn't sound convinced. Dr. Collins leaned in. "Except the pattern keeps repeating. And now we have a window to investigate what we've been missing. We need to go deeper." It was Dr. Collins who first suggested a new approach. "What if we time some of our scans and imaging when Ranger's most agitated? Maybe we'll catch something the monitors miss." The breakthrough came that night, around 3 a.m., when Ranger's entire demeanor changed. He went from dozing peacefully at Ava's bedside to full alert, head up, eyes wide, muscles coiled. Eli, who'd been dozing in the chair, snapped awake at the sound of a low, insistent growl. Sarah, already charting, made note of the exact time. 3:07 a.m. Ava's monitors showed nothing alarming, but her skin had gone a shade paler, her breaths slightly shallower. Sarah called Dr. Collins, who ordered a new series of brain scans and directed the ICU team to prepare for deeper neurological imaging. "Let's move," she said. "If he's right, we don't want to miss our chance." The portable CT scanner arrived within the hour. The radiologist on call, still skeptical but intrigued, wheeled the machine in. As they positioned Ava, Ranger whined and circled, never taking his eyes off her. Ben and Melissa stood at the foot of the bed, gripping each other's hands, holding their breath. They waited. The scans came through. First the basic images, then deeper, more nuanced slices of Ava's brainstem. Dr. Collins and the radiologist squinted at the screen, scrolling back and forth. "There," Collins said, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you see that? A pinprick of darkness near the base of the brainstem, almost invisible on the previous scans, but clearer now." The radiologist's eyes widened. "It's a microbleed, tiny but in a critical area. Could explain the fluctuations in her breathing and consciousness." Dr. Howell was called in. He reviewed the new images, his skepticism melting into awe. "We would have missed this. The standard monitoring can't catch something this small unless it becomes catastrophic. Ranger's agitation matches the timing of these episodes almost exactly." The room fell silent as the weight of the discovery settled in. For the first time, there was a bridge, however tentative, between the world of science and the world of instinct. The ICU team didn't cheer, didn't shout, but the relief in their voices was unmistakable. "Now we have a real shot," Collins said. "We can target treatment, plan for intervention, but we have to decide how to proceed. This is uncharted territory." In the days that followed, the ICU team worked as a true unit. Ranger's behavior was tracked with clinical precision, his every movement compared against Ava's vital signs and neurological readings. Each night at 3 a.m., Ranger became restless, sometimes whining, sometimes pacing or nudging Ava's hand. Each episode coincided with minute changes in Ava's neurological patterns, fluctuations that might otherwise have gone unnoticed until it was too late. Melissa found herself watching Ranger more than the machines, trusting the rhythm of his instincts. Ben, skeptical by nature, surrendered to a kind of faith he'd never known, writing letters to Ava in a journal, promising her the world if she'd just wake up. Eli became an unofficial part of the medical team, briefing doctors and nurses at every shift change about Ranger's quirks, his history with PTSD, his tendency to alert when something was wrong. He taught the night nurses how to interpret his postures, the difference between boredom and real anxiety, the subtle signals only someone who loved him could see. The hospital buzzed with the news. Parents of other patients began to ask for Ranger to visit their rooms. News crews, tipped off by a nurse's late-night post, started to circle. Hospital administrators hesitated, unsure how to manage the attention, but unwilling to deny the hope that was slowly blossoming within their walls. Dr. Howell, once the staunchest opponent, now reviewed the logs himself. He cornered Eli in the hall one morning. "Do you think he knows what's going on inside her head? Or is it just coincidence?" Eli shrugged, smiling for the first time in days. "I think he knows she needs him. Sometimes that's enough." The official diagnosis, microbleed near the brainstem, intermittent and unpredictable, was a revelation. But it also presented a risk. Surgery was possible but dangerous. The alternative, waiting and hoping the bleed would resolve on its own, was equally fraught. But at least for the first time they had a clear target, and a guide no one could explain, but everyone now trusted. In the silence of the ICU, with Ranger curled at Ava's feet, the old boundaries between science and instinct dissolved. Data and intuition had found each other. The team moved forward, united not just by their training, but by the lessons learned from a dog who refused to be ignored. The path ahead was uncertain, but hope, real, rational hope, had returned. And as the hospital settled into another long night, the line between what could be measured and what could not had never mattered less. The discovery of the microbleed brought hope, but also heavy, terrifying choices. It was the kind of moment when every parent dreams of certainty, yet finds only risk, when faith in technology collides with something deeper, older, and harder to name. In the days after the breakthrough, Ava's room became the center of a quiet storm. The ICU team circled, collaborating on next steps, each member weighed down by the knowledge that one mistake could cost a life. Ben stood at the window, shoulders tight, staring out at the Texas dusk. Below, the world spun on. Car headlights flickered down rain-slicked streets. Children played in the hospital garden. Nurses laughed in brief, stolen moments. It all seemed impossibly far away. Inside, Ava lay in her cocoon of wires and hope, while Ranger, always vigilant, slept at her feet, rising every so often to pace and whine, ears flicking at every shift in the rhythm of her breathing. The medical consensus was grim. The microbleed in Ava's brainstem was small, but dangerously placed. It might resolve on its own, but if it didn't, or if it grew, she could lose more than consciousness. she could lose herself. Surgery was possible, but fraught with risk. One slip could mean permanent damage or worse. That evening, the ICU team gathered in a cramped consultation room. Ben and Melissa sat across from Dr. Collins, Dr. Howell, Eli, and Sarah. Melissa gripped Ben's hand with white-knuckled determination. Ranger lay on the floor, tail thumping, as if he too sensed the gravity in the room. Dr. Collins broke the silence. Here's where we are. The microbleed explains Ava's symptoms. We have two options: watch and wait, or go in surgically to relieve the pressure and stop the bleed. The odds aren't perfect for either. Dr. Howell, once so sure of every fact, looked softer, almost vulnerable. If we wait, there's a chance she improves. But there's also a real risk the bleed worsens. If we operate, well, it's brainstem surgery. Even the best hands can't guarantee safety. Ben's voice was barely a whisper. What would you do if it was your daughter? Collins looked away, her composure slipping. I wish I could say. Sometimes medicine is less about right and wrong, more about what you can live with, what risk you can bear. We do have one thing we didn't before. Ranger. His alerts have been right every time. That's new ground for all of us. Melissa squeezed Ben's hand. I trust Ranger. He's always been there. When I volunteered during the flood, when he found that missing child, when no one else believed. He doesn't act unless there's a reason. Sarah nodded. I've never seen anything like it. I say we listen to both the scans and the dog. Eli added softly. Sometimes, science needs a push from somewhere else. The room fell silent. Ben stared at the floor, racked with indecision. He wanted logic, numbers, certainty, but all he had were people. People who cared enough to listen to a dog, and a wife whose faith and instinct had already kept Ava alive. Melissa's eyes were clear. I think we should operate. We trust the team. We trust Ranger. We fight. Ben closed his eyes, feeling the fear settle in his bones. Then he nodded. We fight. With the family's consent, the hospital went into action. The surgical team assembled. Dr. Collins would lead, with Dr. Howell assisting, a team now united, not divided, by humility and hope. Sarah coordinated pre-op, soothing Melissa as she helped prep Ava for surgery. Ben called family members with shaking hands, voice breaking but resolute. Eli stayed with Ranger, promising to watch over him through every minute. In the pre-op holding area, Ben and Melissa kissed Ava's forehead, tears streaming down their faces. You're our miracle, sweetheart. We're right here, Melissa whispered. Ben pressed the stuffed bear to her chest. Ranger, not allowed in the OR, leaned in and gently nuzzled Ava's hand one last time. The operating room was silent except for the hum of machines and the quiet breathing of the team. Collins led with measured authority, her voice calm but urgent as she guided each move. Howell, usually so certain, found himself double-checking every step. For the first time in his career, he found himself thinking not of the odds, but of the moments Ranger had predicted, the instincts that didn't fit any medical model. Outside, Eli and Sarah sat with Ranger. The old dog paced the waiting area, whining, then sitting, then pacing again. Eli told Sarah stories, how Ranger once froze on a rooftop during a flood, refusing to move until rescuers realized the building's structure was unsound, how he'd nearly been retired for PTSD, and how animals, like people, sometimes needed a second chance to find their place in the world. As hours crawled by, Ben and Melissa waited in a private room, clutching Ava's favorite bracelet and the picture she'd drawn of Ranger before the accident. The air was thick with anxiety, but also something else. Solidarity, hope, a sense that even if the outcome was uncertain, they'd made the bravest choice possible. Inside the OR, the tension was electric. Collins worked meticulously, navigating the perilous landscape of a child's brain. At a critical moment, a blip on the monitor made her pause. Howell caught her eye, and for a moment, both remembered the logbook, the dog's uncanny timing. Collins made a subtle adjustment, guided not only by what she saw on the screen, but by a sense, impossible to quantify, that this was the right move. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Collins closed the incision and exhaled. "We did everything we could," she said, her voice shaky but proud. "Now we wait." Ranger, waiting with Eli and Sarah, suddenly went still. He lay down, head on his paws, eyes closed, not sleeping, but calm. For the first time in days, he was at peace. In the recovery room, Ava was wheeled out, monitors trailing. Collins came to find Ben and Melissa, her scrubs stained, her eyes red. "She's stable," she said simply. "Now it's up to her, and a little bit of luck." Ben and Melissa collapsed into each other's arms, tears of exhaustion and gratitude spilling over. Eli led Ranger to the door, where he sat, unmoving, until a nurse finally allowed him inside. He pressed his nose to Ava's hand, as if to reassure her and himself that he would never leave her side. That night, Mercy Children's Hospital was quiet, the storm replaced by stars. Inside room 316, Data and Instinct had become partners. A family had made a leap of faith, a medical team had dared to trust the unknown, and a dog had proven that the best science sometimes starts with a little hope. In the end, it was the courage to listen, to each other, to instinct, to what couldn't be measured, that offered the best chance for a miracle. The hours after surgery unfolded in slow motion, every second stretching long and thin as a razor's edge. Night fell across Austin, wrapping Mercy Children's Hospital in darkness, broken only by neon exit signs and the quiet glow of computer screens. In the ICU waiting lounge, Ben and Melissa clung to each other, shoulders pressed together, hands tangled tight as rope. They'd survived the storm and the decision. Now came the longest wait of their lives. Ava's room had been transformed for recovery. More monitors, new lines, a brace around her head. The surgical team had done everything possible, but the rest was beyond science, left to healing, time, and hope. Hospital protocol barred Ranger from entering the OR or post-op recovery. He waited outside the glass doors, lying at full stretch, unmoving except for an occasional twitch of his tail or an anxious glance toward the nurses passing by. Eli stayed with Ranger through the night, pacing the hall while doctors checked on other patients. He'd never seen the old dog so still. Every hour, Eli crouched beside him, stroking his ears and murmuring words only Ranger seemed to hear. In those moments, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them, a retired hero and the one human who'd never lost faith in him. Sarah checked in on them between shifts, offering coffee, gentle smiles, and updates. "She's stable for now," she whispered to Eli. "Vitals are holding. We're watching for any sign." But everyone knew what was really happening. The battle had shifted from the hands of the surgeons to the quiet strength of a child fighting her way back to the surface. Ben and Melissa kept vigil on opposite sides of Ava's bed. The only sound was the mechanical sigh of the ventilator and the steady beeps of her heart monitor. Ben, once so practical and rational, now found himself talking to God, to the universe, to Ava, to anyone who might listen. He whispered promises about soccer games, summer trips, and the puppy she'd always wanted, bargaining for one more day with his little girl. Melissa sat in silence, drawing circles on the back of Ava's hand. She remembered every detail of her daughter's life, how Ava used to leave love notes on her pillow, how she'd run into Melissa's arms after school, how she always wanted to help, always believed in happy endings. Melissa held on to that faith, letting it fill the space where fear threatened to take root. Out in the hallway, the hospital's mood had shifted. Staff who'd once been skeptical now stopped by to check the family's progress. Even Dr. Howell, who'd always kept his distance, poked his head into the lounge more than once, asking after Ava and, awkwardly, after Ranger. Collins, exhausted but resolute, spent her downtime double-checking Ava's scans and vitals, then stepping out to offer quiet reassurances. "She's fighting. You did the right thing." The hours bled into each other. Eli shared stories with Sarah, filling the silence with tales from Ranger's past. He spoke of the flood rescue, the missing child, the moment Ranger refused to give up when everyone else had lost hope. He told her about Ranger's near retirement, his struggles with PTSD, and how Melissa had spent months retraining him, teaching him to trust again, to believe that even old, battered heroes deserved second chances. He wasn't just saving others, Eli said quietly. He was saving himself. Sarah listened, eyes shining in the dim light. "Maybe that's why he's so tuned into Ava," she whispered. "Maybe he recognizes the fight in her, the way he recognized it in himself." The surgical team made their rounds, adjusting medication, checking dressings, monitoring the slow, stubborn climb of Ava's numbers. The waiting was excruciating. There were moments when her heart rate faltered, when the machines blared their alarms and everyone rushed to her side. Moments that left Ben and Melissa breathless, holding on by a thread. During one long, anxious hour near midnight, Ben pulled out his phone and scrolled through old photos. Ava in her soccer uniform, Ava building sandcastles at the lake, Ava grinning with Ranger at her side. He handed the phone to Melissa, and together they remembered the stories behind every picture. Each memory was a lifeline, a reminder of who they were fighting for. Outside the ICU, Eli and Sarah sat on the floor beside Ranger. The dog's eyes tracked every movement inside the room. At one point he whimpered, ears perked, then slumped back to the ground with a heavy sigh. "He knows," Eli said softly. "He always knows." Sarah nodded, wiping a tear. "If she pulls through, it'll be because everyone refused to give up. Doctors, nurses, her parents, and him." It was just before dawn when something changed. Ranger stood suddenly, stiffening, then wagging his tail, nose pressed to the bottom of the glass door. Eli watched, heart pounding, as if waiting for a message only the dog could deliver. Inside, the monitors began to shift. A hint of stronger breathing, a flicker of movement in Ava's fingers. Sarah, quick as ever, caught the change and rushed in to check her pupil response. Ben and Melissa leaned in, hope and terror mixing in equal measure. Collins joined them, shining a tiny light in Ava's eyes, watching for any sign that her brain was waking. And then, a faint flutter. Ava's eyelids moved, just a fraction, but enough to send the room into a silent frenzy. Ben choked out a sob. Melissa pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. Ranger, sensing the moment, whined and scratched at the door. For the first time, the staff didn't try to stop him. Instead, Collins herself opened the door and beckoned Eli and Ranger inside. The old dog crept to Ava's side, laid his head gently on the bed, and waited. He didn't bark, didn't move. He simply stayed, the living proof of faith, instinct, and second chances. As sunlight spilled across the hospital's polished floors, the team realized they were witnessing something remarkable. It wasn't just science that had brought Ava back, nor was it only faith. It was both, the best of human knowledge, guided by the quiet certainty of a dog who refused to give up on a little girl. In the end, it wasn't about choosing between protocol and instinct. It was about believing that sometimes miracles needed both. And so they waited, family, doctors, nurses, and one extraordinary dog, all holding their breath for the first true sign of return. On the edge of hope, they chose not to measure what couldn't be measured, but to believe in it, and let that faith carry them through the darkness to dawn. The first golden rays of sunrise slipped through the hospital blinds, painting stripes across the floor of room 316. The ICU's silence was no longer heavy with fear, but charged with anticipation, fragile, breathless hope that Ava Brooks, after so many days on the edge, might be fighting her way back. Every nurse on the night shift lingered outside her door. The surgical team finished rounds in record time, eager for any news. Word had spread. Something remarkable was happening in the quiet heart of Mercy Children's Hospital. Inside, the Brooks family was locked in a vigil that felt both endless and urgent. Ben sat slumped in a chair, eyes glued to the monitors, barely daring to blink. Melissa rested her head on the edge of Ava's bed, clutching her daughter's small hand, lips pressed to her knuckles. At Ava's side, Ranger was a silent sentinel, his muzzle resting on the mattress, amber eyes never leaving the girl he'd watched over for so long. It was just after dawn when Collins returned, stethoscope swinging from her neck, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She paused at the door, taking in the tableau, parents, dog, and child suspended in the first moments of a new day. "Let's see how our miracle's doing," she murmured, slipping inside. Ranger, sensing the doctor's presence, nudged closer to Ava's hand. He whined softly, then licked her fingers. Melissa's heart lurched. "Do you think—" Before Collins could answer, the monitors blipped, an increase in Ava's heart rate, so small it would have gone unnoticed if everyone weren't watching so closely. Ranger perked up, tail thumping against the bed frame. Collins leaned over, shining a tiny penlight into Ava's eyes. There, unmistakable, a flicker beneath closed lids, the faintest squeeze of her mother's hand. "Ben, look!" Melissa cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ava's fingers twitched, then curled. Her lips moved, a soft sound escaping, more breath than word, but filled with meaning. "Ranger." The name was little more than a whisper, but it broke the spell of silence in the room. Ben jumped to his feet, laughter and sobs tumbling together. Collins signaled to Sarah and the rest of the team. "She's coming back. Let's keep her calm. Let's keep watching." Within moments, the ICU transformed. Nurses, doctors, techs, everyone wanted to see. Eli, who'd camped outside all night, was ushered in with Sarah. As news spread, a hospital photographer slipped into the room, quietly capturing the moment. A groggy girl, her mother in tears, her father grinning through his own, and an old German shepherd whose faith had never wavered. Ranger nudged Ava's hand again. This time her grip tightened. Cameras caught the instant, a child's hand, impossibly small, wrapped around the paw of a dog the world had nearly given up on. Ava blinked, squinting at the unfamiliar light, then focused on the face she loved most. "Mom," she croaked. Melissa dropped to her knees beside the bed. "I'm here, baby. We're all here. You did it." Dr. Collins knelt next to them, her usual reserve replaced by wonder. "You're a fighter, Ava. You've got the whole hospital rooting for you." Ava managed a sleepy smile, eyes drifting to Ranger. "He stayed with me. I heard him calling." No one corrected her. No one tried to explain that what she felt, what she heard, was impossible to measure. They believed it, because they had seen with their own eyes what couldn't be proven, only witnessed. News of Ava's awakening swept through the hospital. Nurses texted colleagues on other floors. Parents of other patients poked their heads out of rooms, desperate for good news. By afternoon, a local news crew had arrived, drawn by rumors of the miracle dog. For once, the ICU was a place of celebration. Dr. Howell, once the harshest skeptic, made his way to Ava's bedside. He cleared his throat, awkward in the presence of so much joy. "Ava," he said, "you've given us all a reason to believe. Ranger, too." He knelt, reaching out to scratch Ranger's ears. "You're not just a therapy dog, are you, boy? You're part of the team." Melissa hugged him, grateful for the humility that comes only from having one's certainty shattered and rebuilt. "Thank you, Doctor, for trusting us, eventually." Eli wiped tears from his eyes, kneeling beside Ranger. "You did it, partner. You really did it." The celebration was small but profound. Staff, parents, and strangers drawn together by the sight of a girl who'd beaten the odds, a family's steadfast hope, and the dog who refused to give up. That evening, as visitors trickled out and the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Ava rested quietly, eyes half closed but awake, her hand never straying far from Ranger's head. Dr. Collins lingered at the door with Sarah and Eli. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah whispered. "It's like science and faith, like everything we thought we knew, just blended together." Collins nodded. "That's the lesson, isn't it? We're not meant to have all the answers. Sometimes, you just have to listen. To your gut, to the people and creatures who see things you can't." Eli grinned, scratching Ranger behind the ears. "Sometimes, you have to trust the underdog." The next day, a hospital-wide celebration was held. Staff from every floor crowded the hallways as Ava, still weak but smiling, was wheeled through the ICU with Ranger walking proudly at her side. Dr. Collins and Dr. Howell made speeches, nurses cried, and even the hospital administrator, once so wary of disruptions, called Ranger a hero in his own right. Photos of Ava's hand on Ranger's paw made the rounds on social media, a beacon of hope in a world hungry for miracles. Through it all, Ava held tight to her parents, her voice growing stronger, her eyes never leaving her loyal friend. "I heard you," she whispered to Ranger that night. "I'll always hear you." And everyone who had been there knew the truth. Sometimes hope is measured in heartbeats and miracles in moments, especially when a dog decides not to give up. Ava's recovery became more than a medical success. It became a story that rippled through the walls of Mercy Children's Hospital and into the wider world. Room 316, once the scene of whispered worries and blinking machines, transformed into a crossroads where science, instinct, and hope met, challenging long-held assumptions about healing, teamwork, and the invisible bonds that connect us. Each day brought new milestones. Ava's grip grew stronger. Her laughter, shy and soft at first, soon filled the room as her parents took turns reading her favorite stories or sneaking Ranger extra treats beneath the covers. Sarah and Eli visited every shift, sometimes just to sit quietly with Ava and Ranger, sometimes to swap stories of past miracles that had never made the charts. For the first time, the monitors felt less like a threat and more like a chorus of gentle reminders that Ava was still here, still fighting. But the hospital's interest went beyond bedside celebration. Administrators, curious and cautious, convened special meetings to discuss what had happened. They combed through the logs, Ranger's alerts, the timing of every vital sign change, Sarah's notes, and Collins's images of the microbleed. What emerged wasn't just a case of lucky timing or emotional storytelling, but a new kind of evidence. The pattern in Ranger's instincts, The way his presence seemed to knit together parents and staff, doubt and faith, data and the unexplainable. Dr. Collins and Dr. Howell, once unlikely collaborators, found themselves presenting their findings together at staff conferences. Collins, with her blend of open-mindedness and expertise, walked the team through the timeline. Without Ranger, we might have missed the bleed until it was too late. He saw, or sensed, what the best tech in the world couldn't show us in time. She finished every talk by emphasizing humility in medicine. Sometimes the missing piece isn't more data. It's listening to patients, to families, and even to the creatures we too often dismiss. Howell, formerly the strictest voice for protocol, surprised everyone with his honesty. "I was wrong to dismiss what didn't fit the model," he told an auditorium full of hospital staff, his voice clear but quiet. It was pride, plain and simple. The lesson here isn't that we abandon science for feelings. The lesson is that real medicine means always keeping a window open for what we don't understand. We saved a life by setting aside ego, working together, and, yes, trusting a dog. These reflections echoed far beyond the hospital's conference rooms. Local news outlets picked up the story, then regional and national media. Parents called the hospital, wanting to know more about animal-assisted therapy. Some sent thank-you letters to Ranger, crayon drawings from kids, letters from grateful mothers, even a plaque from a retired nurse. To Ranger, proof that sometimes healing wears 4 paws and a wagging tail. But the change at Mercy went deeper than headlines. Administrators quietly met with Collins, Howell, and the ICU team to update hospital protocol. From now on, behavioral observations from therapy animals would be included in complex case reviews. Data from the Ranger logs would inform future staff training, opening the door for more nuanced collaboration between animal handlers and clinicians. "Empathy changes systems," one nurse wrote in a staff forum, "but only if we let it." For the Brooks family, gratitude was the dominant feeling, but reflection ran just as deep. Ben, the former skeptic, now found himself journaling every night, documenting not just Ava's progress, but his own journey through fear, hope, and humility. "I learned something I can't explain," he wrote. "You don't always get to see the path ahead. Sometimes, you just follow the love and trust it will lead you home." Melissa, who had trusted Ranger from the beginning, was asked to speak at a parent roundtable for families in crisis. Her message was simple but powerful. Don't be afraid to listen to what others miss. Trust your gut, your child, and those who love you, even if they walk on 4 legs. Ranger's presence in the hospital became almost legendary. Children in other wards begged for visits. Staff who'd once scoffed now stopped to scratch his ears or to ask Eli about animal behavior and the science of instinct. One evening, a young resident confessed to Sarah, "I used to think therapy dogs were just for comfort. Now I see. They're partners. Sometimes they're the best listener in the room." Ava's slow, determined healing was tracked by doctors and staff, but also celebrated by the community. When she was strong enough, the hospital arranged for her to visit other children, with Ranger always at her side. Each time she'd squeeze his paw and smile, reminding everyone what hope looked like after a storm. The story reached its most profound note when Collins and Howell were invited to share their findings at a national conference. The 2 doctors stood together, side by side. Howell, once the skeptic. Collins, always the bridge builder. They spoke not just of medicine, but of humility and change, of collaboration and courage. Collins ended their presentation with a quiet, universal message. The line between science and instinct, data and love, isn't a wall. It's a bridge. We heal best when we walk it together. And so, the lessons learned from room 316 lived on. not just in charts or logs, but in hearts and minds, in hospital policy and everyday practice. Empathy was no longer a soft word. It was recognized as a kind of science, one that required the same rigor, curiosity, and humility as any other field. Ava's story, Ranger's faith, and the ICU team's willingness to believe in the unmeasurable did not just save a life. They changed a hospital, inspired a community, and proved, once and for all, that sometimes the most important things are those we can't measure at all. Months slipped by, gentle and golden, until the world beyond Mercy Children's Hospital seemed brighter than anyone remembered. Ava's recovery, though slow and sometimes uncertain, became a beacon, not just for her family, but for staff, patients, and even strangers drawn in by her miraculous story. The hospital's corridors, once haunted by late-night anxieties and the sharp smell of antiseptic, now echoed with laughter, hope, and the proud footsteps of a German shepherd who'd become a legend. On a sunny Saturday morning, a crowd gathered in Mercy's main atrium, the air buzzing with celebration. Balloons drifted above the registration desk, reporters clustered beside the windows. Patients, nurses, and doctors leaned against the walls, smiling, some wiping away tears. Even hospital administrators, usually so reserved, wore pins that read, Team Ranger. At the heart of the gathering was Ava, walking with the careful confidence of someone who'd learned what every step meant. She was smaller than before, thinner, but her eyes shone with a light untouched by fear. On one side, Melissa steadied her, and on the other, Ben gripped her hand. Between them strolled Ranger, his coat brushed and shining, a blue honorary team member scarf around his neck. Cameras flashed as Ava and Ranger walked the halls together, a victory parade for survivors and believers alike. Children in wheelchairs and on crutches cheered. Nurses hugged each other. Dr. Collins, now a leader in the hospital's new animal-assisted care initiative, held back tears as she followed a few steps behind, flanked by Dr. Howell and Sarah. Eli, beaming, filmed the scene for the hospital's social media, though more than once he had to wipe his eyes and focus the lens. The celebration culminated in the hospital's garden, where a new plaque had been installed beneath a freshly planted oak. It read, "In honor of Ranger, who reminded us to listen, to instinct, to each other, to the quiet hope in every heart." Ava took the microphone from the podium, the crowd settling into expectant silence. She hesitated for just a moment, then looked down at Ranger. "When everyone gave up, Ranger didn't," she said, her voice clear. "He listened even when I couldn't speak. Sometimes the answers we need aren't in numbers or charts. They're in the heart, the eyes, and the hope we share. If you're afraid or alone, remember, there's always someone, or some dog, ready to believe in you." The crowd erupted in applause, tears shining on so many faces. Nurses who'd held her hand through the night, parents who'd whispered prayers outside her door, children who now saw themselves in her courage. The celebration was also the official launch of Ranger's Hope, a new nonprofit founded by the Brooks family, Dr. Collins, Sarah, and Eli. Its mission was simple but bold: to support animal-assisted therapy for children in crisis and fund research into the mysterious healing bond between people and animals. Flyers were handed out with information on therapy dog training, volunteer programs, and how families could access emotional support in times of medical crisis. Reporters crowded around Dr. Collins, peppering her with questions. "What's the secret?" someone asked. Collins smiled. "There is no secret, just humility, collaboration, and a willingness to trust, even when the answers don't fit the model. Science is about curiosity. Empathy is the bridge." Sarah joined Collins and Eli, sharing plans to train new teams across Texas and beyond. "We want every child to have access to this kind of hope," Sarah explained. "Not every story will be a miracle, but every child deserves a champion, on 2 legs or 4. Ben and Melissa hugged Ava as the ceremony ended, awash in the love of strangers who now felt like family. "We couldn't have done this without everyone here," Ben said softly, his arm around Melissa. "Not just the doctors and nurses, but everyone who believed when it was hardest. That's the legacy. Never giving up on each other." Later, as the crowd thinned and the balloons floated away, Ava sat quietly beside Ranger beneath the oak. She stroked his fur, remembering the long, frightening nights when hope was only a distant dream. "I was never alone," she whispered, and Ranger nuzzled her hand in reply. Inside the hospital, changes continued to ripple outward. Dr. Collins and Sarah began mentoring new staff, blending medical expertise with compassion. Dr. Howell, once so bound by protocol, now taught a special class on the art and science of listening, reminding everyone that the best care came from humility, teamwork, and the courage to accept what can't always be measured. Eli, inspired by Ranger's journey, worked with state agencies to expand therapy dog programs into rural and underserved hospitals. Ranger became a symbol, not only of second chances, but of the bridge between what we know and what we still need to discover. Ava's story and Ranger's legacy echoed far beyond Mercy's walls. Children in hospitals across the state sent photos and letters. Research grants were awarded for projects exploring the power of animal intuition in healing. More than one parent, facing impossible odds, reached out to Ranger's Hope for advice, and found not just resources, but a listening ear. And always, the lesson of room 316 remained. Real healing requires both heart and mind. Second chances save lives, for people and animals alike. Empathy is a form of science, and science must always leave room for mystery. When we listen to every voice, even those without words, we open the door to miracles. As summer faded to fall, Ava and Ranger returned often to the hospital, visiting children and staff, spreading hope wherever they went. They were living proof that sometimes the bravest thing is not to know the answer, but to trust in something bigger, in love, in instinct, in the quiet, stubborn hope that carries us forward when all else fails. And in every room they entered, from the ICU to the garden, the story repeated in new voices, new hearts. When the world seems dark, listen closely. Miracles are speaking, if only we remember how to hear.